So I think I understand finally, because of the new revelations coming out about the coup attempt, the Russia collusion coup, where Brennan and Comey and all those characters apparently, if we are to believe the documents we're seeing, I don't know how to interpret them other than a confirmation that there was literally a coup attempt. I don't know how else to interpret it. And I really, really tried hard in the beginning of this Russia collusion stuff when people who were, even more skeptical than I am, if that's possible, were saying, hey, from the very beginning, people were saying, hey, this looks like just a coup attempt. It looks like some kind of organized coup. And I said, if you remember, I said, no, let's cool down that talk. I don't quite see any evidence of a coup. Sure, lots of people didn't like the president. There are people in jobs and they can do little things that make his life hard, but it's not some kind of organized, understood, explicit coup attempt. I mean, that's just crazy. Except that apparently it was. Apparently it was exactly that. It wasn't even sort of like that. It wasn't suggestive of that. It wasn't reminding you of that. It was actually that, based on the documents that we've seen, especially the ones that just came out. Now, if you understand that, and you understand that the latest documents are a little bit more damning to both Obama and Biden, meaning that apparently, if we are to believe what we see in the documents, it looks like President Obama was pretty deeply involved in something that looks exactly like a coup attempt. And that means that Biden was involved because he was in the room. He would have had to know about it. Now, here's the thing. How do you explain that? I feel as if you would agree with the following supposition, that the leaders and the important people in the Democratic Party, they could kind of get anybody nominated they wanted. Don't you think? Don't you think that the old Clinton crowd and the Obama crowd and the deep state, the Democrats, don't you think that the leadership of the party could kind of push things in whatever direction they wanted in terms of the nominee? And you might have asked yourself, well, if that's the case, and they could make sort of anybody they wanted the nominee by, controlling the media, for one thing. They can control the media coverage. They can control the funding, probably. They can control which advisors work for whom, etc. So if you take my assumption that the people in charge do have the ability to create the nominee they want, essentially manipulating the voters into voting for who they want, why would they choose Biden? Because by any measure, he's the least capable candidate who has ever run for president. I don't think you could find somebody who is less capable than Biden. It's certainly not missing their gaze that they're running an incompetent. That's pretty obvious at this point. So why would they do it? And the answer is to protect themselves. Biden is the only person who was in the race for the nomination. He's the only one who had the following quality. He was just as guilty as the other people in the party. He's part of, presumably, this is the speculation, right? My speculation. I think they needed him because he's both controllable and he has the same risk profile as they do. So you could count on him to make all the investigations go away because he had the same risk. I don't think there was anybody else in that category, was there? Anybody else who would be as good a stooge as Biden to keep them out of jail? So now, when I say stuff like this, you should be saying to yourself, well, that's just about the biggest story. There's never been a bigger story than this. Watergate was a peanut compared to this. What was as big as this? Can you that Monica Lewinsky? No, tiny, tiny little problem. There's nothing that I can think of in modern, at least my lifetime. I can't think of anything except maybe getting into the Iraq War the wrong way with bad information. But this has got to be gigantic, enormous, biggest story of all time. So let's look at the CNN homepage and see how they're covering the biggest story in the history of the United States. Let's see. Nothing. 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 Now, have you ever seen them just not cover a story? Usually they'll at least put a line in there or say, well, something happened, but we're not going to talk about it. Or, well, these crazy conservatives, they're making some claims, but they're all wrong, so don't pay attention to them. But have you ever seen them just go dark on the biggest story in the history of the United States? Just not covering it. What's that tell you? It tells you they're complicit. What else would it mean? Why else would they not cover the biggest story in, again, the history of the United States? There's no bigger story than this. Wars maybe are bigger stories, but this is pretty big. And if you wondered, hey, is CNN and the mainstream media, are they sort of complicit with whatever this coup thing was? And I would say at this point, it's obvious. There's some claims that you have to be careful about making because you get into legal problems if you make a claim that can't be backed up. So I'll just put it in the form of an opinion. Based on what I've seen, a reasonable person would conclude there was an actual coup attempt. Brennan was probably the leader, if not one of them or the leader, and that CNN, at least, probably other media, were 100% complicit. What else could you interpret this as? Now, I don't know what other entities are covering or not covering it, but keep an eye on that. So here are some of the things that are coming out in this new drops. And if I understand this right, this stuff's all too complicated for me, so I may be missing some details. But I believe it's true. I believe it's true that the only reason we're learning about these new things is because the Flynn case wasn't dismissed. Is that true? That we wouldn't have known this stuff, except that they made the mistake of keeping the Flynn thing alive even after the prosecutor wanted to drop it? I mean, what they're doing to Flynn should just be another crime. I mean, it's just a crime, the way they're treating that guy. And I don't know. So it looks to me like that's the only reason we would know this stuff, which is shocking in itself. So here are some of the things we found out. That one of the primary sources for the Steele dossier was suspected to be a Russian agent at the time. At the time they put the dossier together and they were deciding what to do with it, even then they knew that the person who was the source was a suspected Russian spy. Now, you'd think that they would mention that to, let's say, the courts or to anybody who needed to know. Hey, just a heads up, we've got this information, but an important part of it comes from somebody we suspect is a Russian spy. You leave that out, and you're not playing on Team America. Wouldn't you agree? If you intentionally leave out that little fact, you're not really on Team America. I don't know what team you're on, but it's not this country. Apparently there's an agent who worked on the case, William Barnett, who believed at the time, and I guess presumably still does, that the whole thing was driven by a get Trump attitude, which he actually had said at the time. He didn't see the basis for the case. It just looked like it was political to him. Now, don't make too much out of that. Because unfortunately, any work group, if you could actually talk to them, privately and individually, any work group for any company, any organization, anywhere, you're going to find some people in the group who say, I don't know why we're even doing this. It's all a big mistake. Are we doing this for all the wrong reasons? So there's always that guy. So if you're ranking what importance to put on these revelations, the fact that there was somebody on the team who thinks the whole thing was BS and shouldn't have been done, you want to believe that that's really meaningful, and maybe it is. I'm not ruling it out. I'm just saying that's one you got to watch, because you'll always get that guy. There's always a disgruntled employee. Look at all the whistleblowers who have stories about Trump. You always have that guy. So just keep in mind that that's on the lower end of credibility, but might be true. At least it fits all the rest of the story. All right, what else did we learn there? We learned that Brennan falsified the intelligence about Russia. What? Now, if Brennan he was head of CIA at that time, right? So he put together this small team of 5 people, and the head of the team was somebody who was his personal friend, somebody he had control over. They come up with a set of conclusions about Russia, and then Brennan tried to sell it to the country as 17 intel agencies agreed, when in fact it was a group of 5, just 5 people, all in the CIA, and really one of them wrote it. So really one person, and that one person was handpicked by Brennan, so really just Brennan. So Brennan sold that his own analysis, which was not in agreement with other people in his own group, people in his group said, hey, you should include this part where we think there's a good chance that Putin actually prefers Hillary Clinton. And the reason we think he might prefer Hillary Clinton is that she's predictable and she had already offered a reset. So he knows what he's getting, but he doesn't know what he's getting with Trump at the time. So Brennan chose to leave out the part where his own people said, we think Putin might actually prefer Hillary Clinton. Is that a big deal? Yeah, it's the biggest story in the history of the United States. That's not a war. It's the biggest story in the United States, in my opinion. The head of the CIA literally falsifying Russian intel, according to what we've been told, for the purpose of overthrowing the United States government, the illegally elected government. Now, weirdly, there might be no penalty for this, because how do you prosecute somebody for having a different opinion? Because that's just what he could claim. He could say, I saw the intel about Putin preferring Hillary Clinton, but in my opinion, it was not worthy of including. That's sort of the whole defense. You really don't need much of a defense beyond, maybe I was wrong, but that was my opinion, and it was my job to have an opinion. I think it's not exactly illegal to try to overthrow the government and fail. So people operating at that level know how to stay, outside the bounds of illegality, while at the same time overthrowing the government or attempting to. Now, since the penalty for that is probably 0, because there'll always be reasonable doubt, what would you think the penalty should be if it were true and if it could be proven? Hypothetically, what would be the appropriate penalty for a John Brennan if, hypothetically, it was found that he had actually tried to overthrow the government, and he did it by falsifying intelligence, essentially leaving out intelligence, which falsified it? I think the death penalty, right? Should you not be subject to the death penalty for that crime? Because I can't think of a bigger crime. How could you do something worse? Seems like a death penalty crime to me. but I'll bet there will be no penalty whatsoever. Um, so here's, I guess I just don't know what to do about the fact that it looks like what's going to happen is that conservative media will make a big deal about it. But have you noticed that if conservative media is the only one that talks about something, it never becomes real to the rest of the world, right? So I believe that our siloed news has created this weird situation where, somebody associated with the left could murder somebody on Fifth Avenue. I just pick an example. They could murder somebody on Fifth Avenue. It could be recorded on 10,000 cameras, confirmed in every possible way that that's exactly what happened. This person murdered this person in front of people, in front of 1 million cameras. And if the entire left mainstream media decided just not to cover it, it wouldn't exist. Even if the conservative media went crazy on it every day and it was headlines and couldn't stop talking about it, as long as the other side simply treats it like it doesn't exist, it actually doesn't exist. We've reached the point where they can disappear reality. Not just make facts disappear, not just leave out a detail, not get something wrong, not even fake news. Actually disappear an entire chunk of reality while you're watching them do it. That's where we're at. Now, if you had told me that that was even possible, I might have said, well, in some weird theoretical way, but watching it happening is just blowing my frickin' mind. I mean, my head is just coming right off when I'm watching CNN literally just ignore it. No, there was no coup attempt. I don't know what you're talking about. What else could they ignore? What else could they ignore? It's like they could ignore anything and just ignore it, and then it doesn't exist.